So there I was in college, driving home up a steep hill to my house. I was in a rush, drive up our steep driveway, park into the garage, and I get out of the car and walk briskly down to the mailbox, turn around to face the house, open the mailbox, and as I'm opening the mailbox, I see out of the corner of my eye my car slowly going backwards out of the garage, down the steep driveway, and then proceeded to go across the street. And I went, whoa. My name's Isaac Chenevy. I've been a fitness trainer for the last 15 years, almost 2 decades, and I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science and psychology. In this world, part of the chronic stress that we have is a term called VUCA, V-U-C-A, and VUCA stands for volatile, U stands for uncertain, C stands for complex, and A stands for ambiguous. And you can apply those. This is a term I think that the military came up with in terms of engaging in conflict. And you can kind of translate that into the social world, work world, personal world, et cetera, that there is a continuing level of VUCA in the world, of the uncertainty, of the stress is kind of like, it's kind of inevitable. You're going to have stress in your life at some point, whether it's in the morning, afternoon, or at night, or in the middle of the night, whether it's tomorrow, next week. It's basically a part of, I don't know, life on Earth. In a way, you can kind of compare it to gravity, such as the gravity of my car being pulled by gravity down the driveway. It just is. It just happens. And we can look at stress as something to avoid, or we can look at stress as something to get better at. That you can also have chemical, environmental stress that can actually make the psychological, emotional stress feel like that's what's going on, is that it's psychological or emotional, and in fact it could be actually just a chemical, biological, environmental stress that your mind and your brain are reacting to. So it's important to understand how these things can all kind of fit and how they all kind of work together, and they're all interrelated and not just separate entities all to their own. You can have what's kind of called a maladaptive response, which is in a way a part of the brain, the limbic system, which we're going to talk about, gets in a way it's kind of like it gets hijacked, so that there isn't any other option than just getting stressed about something. And we're going to talk about some things called neuroplasticity to rearrange that response, but it's important to know that in chronic stress, that's kind of something that is happening. So the body starts to adapt to these, and it's kind of like a cascading effect. And as things start to peel away and the cascading effect starts to take place, the body is trying to respond to the perceived stress and back you up by throwing whatever it has biochemically at your system. So we're going to get into that right now. So let's talk. So diencephalon's down here, the limbic system is right in here, and then we have the prefrontal and the cortex. Okay, so the diencephalon is basically where we have our switchboard. So that's where we get all of our this is where we tend to live in what's kind of considered the mind. You know, where all these parts of the brain are kind of talking to each other and talking to us, and we're talking to it, and trying to figure out, you know, the new problem, or, ooh, that's a really cool idea, and, oh, I should watch this instead of that. You know, that's where kind of all that stuff takes place. This is kind of where we live most of our time. But we also have this underlying limbic system that's making judgments and about survival and, you know, assessing, do I like this? Do I not like this? Is this safe? Is this not safe? And the interesting thing is that you have something that's called the ACC. It's called the anterior cingulate cortex. And the ACC is where it's a very specific place in the brain that basically regulates between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. And this is where things get interesting when we talk about neuroplasticity, when we talk about things using techniques like meditation, biofeedback, all these techniques that are out there. What we're doing is we're actually working that area of the brain to become better at negotiating between full-on emotional responses and quiet, considerate, thought-provoking, executive brain functioning, logic, being more logical. And it acts as a hub, so it's considered a hub point in the brain to help delineate those decisions. Now, when we start talking about mindset and changing your perspective on stress and trying to roll with it like gravity instead of fighting it, there's a number of techniques, and I'll start with the first one, which is probably one of the most important ones, is cognitive behavioral therapy. So that is getting a licensed psychologist or a licensed social worker who works in private practice to go through and work with you on some of the stressful situations and stress patterns or limbic system loops that you have acquired or now are in the habit of. Using cognitive behavior therapy helps to give yourself kind of a 30,000-foot view of yourself, and to be able to look down at yourself and the situation and kind of gain a new perspective that is a little less stress intensive. So it's Mind Over Mood book. No matter who you're working with, demand, request tools that you can work with them and they can work with you on, versus just going in and sitting and talking for hours upon hours. Getting to the root, getting to the tools, figuring out ways to start working mental muscles that move you forward in this world of stress and gravity. You break down the habit or the behavior they're trying to change down to it's like its lowest common denominator. So it's trying to find the most simple, easiest way to do something new that requires the least amount of motivation to do it, right? So it's like the old proverb, right? The first step of 1,000 miles is, the first step, right? The journey begins with the first step. So it's just looking at the little steps that you can do. There's the difference between what's called a process goal versus an outcome goal. So if you want to run a marathon, you want to move up the ladder in the corporate environment, what's the first step that needs to happen? What are the habits that need to start to happen that will get you to those, versus only focusing on the outcome? What's the process? It's getting into the process. We're not trying to do something that's in addition to. We're trying to do something that's instead of. So if, for say, you would like to start meditating more, or just start meditating, well, we need to look at things in terms of what can be taken away that we can then add in. So if you're watching 4 hours of TV every night, so what we need to do, instead of adding another 20 minutes to that 4 hours, and you say, oh, I don't have any time, it's, well, we need to take out 30 minutes of TV time, so it's instead of, not in addition to, in terms of creating these habits. If it's 3 sodas a day and you want to get down to 1 soda a day, then it's adding a club soda with lemon, club soda with a splash of soda, 1 time a day to 2 times a day to eventually 3 times a day, versus no soda. So we're replacing with something else rather than adding to it. You start to hear all this, like, only 20 minutes a day, only 5 minutes a day, only 30 minutes a day, and next thing you know, you're spending half your day doing all these like maintenance, good for you kind of things. So we want to try to find a way to swap out some of the kind of the dead weight of what we're doing, and kind of like a passive kind of a way, and start adding some little more proactive activities to help train our minds to be a little more conscious of living on planet Earth with gravity and stress. Is the giving a talk test. And what it is, it's a 3-minute talk that someone is brought to a room, and they get some time to prepare, very little, and they go into a room where there are a group of experts sitting there watching them. And they sit there and they go, they take notes, and they basically portray a lot of grief and concern about this person who's giving this talk. So in a way to kind of make the person feel very uncomfortable, very stressed, correct? Well, then they started doing something else with this experiment, is they started to have people watch a video about how stress is really good for you and how you've got resources you can pull in and how it helps you perform better and it helps you stay sharp and it helps you stay cognizant of all the things that you need to do in the moment, how to stay in the moment, excitement versus anxiety, that kind of thing. And then they showed another group that how bad stress is for you and how it can put you in the hospital, it can make you sick and you'll die young and all this, like, you know, dramatic stuff. And then they had a third group, I think, but all they got to do was just like play video games. You know, they were just like playing video games before their talk. And what they found was that people that were told that stress is really good for you, they were giving their talk with all these people staring at them, disgruntled and criticizing them, that their body language was much more confident. Their voices stayed elevated. They didn't start to cave in. They didn't start to have self-doubt about what they were talking about. They just kind of kept, you know, pushing through, this stumbling through as best they could to give this talk to these very disgruntled people, very critical, criticizing people. And then what they found with the people who were told that stress was really bad, they found that they started to cave in, their voices started to get a little bit wavery. You could see that they were questioning like how much they really knew. All that kind of like, you know, mind chatter was going on. And the people in the video games were, you know, who played the video games before, they were kind of somewhere in the middle. You know, sometimes they caved in, sometimes they were a little bit, you know, they stayed on point. So, and they've shown this and they've proven this over and over and over again, etc. And that's something that's important to remember, is that this is a practice, this is a process. Finding the right tools when you're in the field to not go down that road of danger, fight or flight. And at the same time, when there are those modes of fight or flight, you know when to turn it off and get back to a more or less, you know, the parasympathetic nervous system side of things that we discussed earlier. The sympathetic fired up, shift to the parasympathetic, you know, the rest and digest. If we're constantly in the fight, flight, or freeze, no bueno, no good. Can't maintain that. The body cannot maintain that. It has to go back to the rest and digest, which is partly why, which is really where the title of the book, Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is because they have, what Sapolsky is talking about is they have peaks of stress and then they go right back into rest and digest. That is how nature and how Earth designed, or how we evolved, was to have these peaks of stress and right back to rest and digest, not this constant 24/7 in our head 21st century stress, fight, flee scenario.